Hello, and welcome back to the second episode of Qualifying for Climate Justice. I'm your host, Lily Barraclough, and today we are discussing different pathways to social and ecological justice and equity through the lens of sustainability transformations, research and activism, and prefigurative politics. Sustainability transformation studies illustrate the ways in which wide systemic change that addresses the root causes of the intersecting biodiversity and climate crises lead to transformative change and a more livable future for all humans and non-human kin. And prefigurative politics explores the ways in which social movements embody the world they are working towards in the present, how they are envisioning a better future, and what they are doing to get there. Joining us today, I have one of the co-founders of the Climate Hope Lab, Samantha Casey. Climate Hope Lab is a collective based in Guelph and Hamilton dedicated to fostering hope through creativity and community. Climate Hope Lab brings people together to imagine and build positive climate futures through a range of experiences, from solutions-focused design jams to monthly socials that create space for connection to arts-based workshops. Welcome, Sam. I'm excited to dive into our discussion today. To start off, I want to speak to some statements from the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, or the IPBES, which is the leading authority on transformative change globally. And they define transformative change as, quote, fundamental system-wide shifts across views, structures, and practices, end quote. And a prominent element of how transformative change happens is through seeds of a good Anthropocene that, quote, help us to understand the different components of a better future that people want and to recognize the processes that lead to the emergence and growth of initiatives that fundamentally change human-environmental relationships, end quote. And that's from Bennett et al. In 2016. Your work would be classified as this type of seed initiative. How do you see your work contributing to transformative change?
That's such a great question, and I think for us, seeds really is what we feel that we're doing. I think our design jams is a really great example of that, because we actually call that whole thing like planting seeds, because a huge part of our design jams is having folks come together from the community to talk about like what is our current reality and like kind of understanding it, but also looking at like what is possible. And not just what's possible in terms of like a feasible sense, but like what do we want to be possible and like how do we get there? We don't imagine that every single person coming to a design jam is immediately going to like dive into a whole project or like start an organization or make something move. But a lot of the seeds that we're hopefully planting at those events like might sprout into something in the future, maybe inspires them down the road. Maybe it also just adds in like inspiration to other work that they're already doing, or just honestly the collective hope, I think too, of like, hey, there's people thinking about this, there's opportunities, things exist, there's solutions, it's not all doom and gloom, and giving people kind of that agency around it too, I think is a huge piece of what we try to do at Climate Hope Lab is really, plant seeds wherever we can and see what grows from them.
I love that you're kind of cultivating the seeds of seeds almost. And I think it's so true that you never know what is going to spark the next initiative or the next cool project that will really make a change in our communities. And everything really starts from those connections, learning that there is something you can do and that you can go ahead and implement and take chances. I love hearing about the ways in which you're creating opportunities to imagine the ways in which we can embody change in the world. And I think that really flows nicely into my next question for you, which speaks to the work of Adrienne Maree Brown and her book, Emergent Strategy, that explains that, quote, we must make just and liberated futures irresistible. We are all the protagonists of what might be called the great turning, the change, the new economy, the new world, end quote. And she also quotes prominent emergent strategist Grace Lee Boggs in that you must, quote, transform yourself to transform the world. And I imagine that both of these quotes and approaches resonate with the work you do. What role do you think that this future visioning and personal or social transformation play in contributing to the broader scope of transformation?
I think, it's huge for us. I think the opportunity for people to both look within with like what needs to change, and then also like what does transformative change look like, and the roles and actors and kind of levers there as well. Design Jam. So far they've been like one-day events where we get people together, and we typically have some type of like challenge or just like inspiration for them to work on. We'll be doing our second one this fall, which will actually be around human-nature connection, which is super fun to envision. And the whole idea is for people to just kind of imagine what's possible, change, and just kind of like resist the apathy that I think so easy to fall into these days, because it's just easier than feeling all the feelings. If you are feeling what we value, which is things like empathy, compassion, which is so huge. I think too, for the transformative change of like looking within and changing that, I think a lot of it also goes back to like when we call like why are we currently in all of these issues, like, and I think a lot of that looks back at like really what is like the root causes of things like colonization and capitalism and like imperialism, and like how did those come to be? Like if you really trickle it down to like, I guess like a very individual level of like what are like almost causes of that, we look at it as like things like greed as a huge one. Like being super greedy is a huge cause of that, and then also being things like thinking you're better than others. Like we survive the divine right of kings, we can survive capitalism, like we can go past this, and also looking at like that as an individual level. So it's like if you can avoid like falling into things like greed, and if you can avoid falling into things like just the lack of caring, like I think if folks can cultivate that caring for others, not just folks that are similar to themselves, but others in community, and imagining that means everyone in community. I think that's a huge part of what we kind of share at our events is like, you're opposing those systems, but at a very basic level, can you give or can you take just what you need and do that? And we try to do that through a lot of our stuff, like even with our events, like we try to support local, we try to support a lot of different groups as well. Like we try to platform as many as we can. We try to like, act in solidarity wherever possible. So I think that's a huge part for us, is like embodying that at a personal level in our work and encouraging others to do the same. So like, living with empathy is a huge one. Living with care and just imagining what that looks like, I think is a big one for us. And then also, at a level of that too, I think it is for transformative change, encouraging people to imagine themselves and like what role they could play. Like I think for many, they get so overwhelmed of like, oh, I have to start something or do something, but we're also like, how can you support current things that already kind of oppose a lot of the systems that we don't want to see? So like, can you support like local CSAs? Can you support local organizations, like volunteering your time, like supporting those, like, supporting local businesses, like doing all those things. I think it's a huge thing for us, because it is like looking at like what does it mean to be in community for so many people. And I think a lot of people come to us, honestly, because there's that kind of like isolation, which I think a lot of systems in place right now is like what has led us to isolation. So I think that's a huge thing too, is like how can we oppose the isolation, and like what are ways to build relationships, and a lot of that takes time.
And I want to pick up on, something you mentioned already, which is that your next design jam is kind of shifting to this focus on human nature relationships. And it flows really well into my next question, which speaks to some of the work by Andrea Ritchie in Practicing New Worlds, Abolition and Emergent Strategies, that speaks to the guidance that we can take from the natural world, both about like building resilience, decentralization, cooperation, and interdependence, and also the ways that we can learn like new possibilities and engage our radical imaginations to center joy and pleasure in our work. And this has also come up in the IPBES Transformative Change Report, where they highlight that disconnection from and domination over nature and communities is a driving force of the interconnected biodiversity and climate crises, as well as like the social injustices that communities face. So I wondered if you could go into a bit more depth about, what you personally and you as in Climate Hope Lab feel that the role of human nature connections are, and how that connects to this broader idea of how relate in the world and how transformative change happens.
I think a huge part for us, and like what we're hoping with the Design Jam, is really to focus on like people and nature thriving together. And I think a huge part, and this actually comes back to like someone wrote this when we were doing an event, when nature thrives, we thrive. And I think that's like a huge part of our philosophy, is like, understanding like the actions that we take is, can you take actions where that is going to benefit both people and nature? I think that's a huge one, because often also we hear a lot of like the rhetoric of like, oh, like I hate people, I love the environment, or like I love animals, but I hate people. But I think we need to realize that like if people aren't being cared for, like that's when like nature really suffers, is when people aren't being cared for, and we aren't kind of imagining that, like how to support people too. Because if people are like set up to thrive, and thrive, I don't just mean as like some type of standard. It means thrive is like the joy and pleasure that we see in like the quality of life. And if we can set people up to thrive and have that kind of connection of like understanding like, oh, we need this, like we need it for so many reasons, like spiritually, physically, emotionally, like we need nature for so many things. So I feel like the more people like can understand that. So we love kind of challenging that narrative of like, oh, I hate people, but I love the environment, because it's like, really, I feel like we need people to love them together, of like, oh, I love the environment so much, so I want people to also, like I also care about people. I think maybe what they mean by that, and I don't want to speak for people, but is they hate like some of the human characteristics of things like cruelty and greed that have caused us, I think, really, and sorry, when I say us, it's like really broad, but have caused some people to really like fracture that relationship with nature and lose it over time. So I think a huge part of that is, going back to like, how do you rebuild those connections? And for many, I think it's just like simply slowing down and like observing like what is around you and like what is your role in it too. I think that's a big one. Like for so many people, like as kids, we have so much curiosity, and like you go outside and you want to observe, and I think you're so much more likely to get enamored. And if we can make more young people fall in love with nature, I think that's huge. Like that's how we're going to see transformative shifts, is like if you at a young age can like have those moments, like those memorable moments, you feel that connection, you know your role in nature, and like you have that positive association relationship, like that relationship will hopefully grow over time and evolve into something. And the more people that do that, I think that's where we're going to see like transformative change, is like that paradigm shift for a lot of people. Because I think the more folks that are disconnected and like don't see that connection with nature, they don't understand the importance, they don't understand the role that it plays, like that's where we're seeing a lot of these fractures, is that kind of, that I want to say cognitive dissonance, is that the word, but like people don't understand that like, truly we need nature to thrive, and nature doesn't really need like humans in a context to thrive. Like by mean by that is like nature, like I think often when we think about the future, is like I feel like nature is so adaptable and so resilient. We've seen that for time and time again with evolution, is like nature will continue, but like will we continue? And I think that's also something really important to look at in the future, is like we want both. Like we want in the future some type of beautiful relationship, I think, to go back to nature and to have that. So I think that's a huge part of it, is that, and understanding that. And I think a huge part too, when we see a lot of it come out of it, is some folks is that being able to like relate to everyone, and like seeing value in everything, like not just charismatic wildlife. Time is its own thing too when it comes to nature, because I think it goes back to slowing down and like observing and just looking around. So I think the more we can get people to encourage to do that and like make pleasurable, joyful moments to observe nature, like that's where we're going to see transformative change start to happen.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for joining me today. And definitely we've talked about so many pieces of the work that you're doing and how that connects to both sustainability transformations and prefigurative politics. And, I really think you folks are embodying a lot of the future that we want to see in the work that you're doing. So that's amazing to hear. So thanks again for joining me.
Yes. Yeah, thank you so much for having us, and we hope to see you at a future event. And we're really honored to be part of this.
Welcome to the second half of this episode on how we envision alternative futures that are sustainable, equitable, and just. I was so thrilled to have a conversation with Sam from the Climate Hope Lab, where we talked a lot about the importance of looking at the root causes of climate change, resisting apathy, and imagining what is possible through collective hope, building relationships, and rebuilding our relationships with nature. And I want to turn first to a quote from Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson's What If We Get This Right? Visions of Climate Futures, in which they quote, "Set aside your resignation and nihilism. There is a wide range of possible futures. Peril and possibility coexist," end quote. And I think it's so critical to think about how we hold the realities of the climate crisis and biodiversity crisis that we're in, but at the same time, the solutions that we need to address the root causes of the climate crisis in colonialism, capitalism, racial capitalism, heteropatriarchy, must come from a system that really focuses on building relationships, acknowledging multiple past and alternative ways of conceptualizing the futures, and really coming from a place of plurality in terms of the ways we connect to one another, the ways we envision ourselves and the movement, and the ways we build the future that we want to live in. Prefigurative politics originally emerged through the anarchist strand of socialism and started with a lot of unions and across the globe in modeling the decision-making practices that they wanted to see at the large scale in their workplaces at the level of their own workers' unions. Things like consensus-based decision-making, horizontal hierarchies, and in Rykstead and Graddon's Prefigurative Politics, Building Tomorrow Today, they really emphasize the fact that prefigurative politics started from a focus on bottom-up democracy, freedom, equality, mutual aid, emancipation, and other authors like Lynn et al. Stress the importance of relationality, self-determination, allowing communities and people figure out for themselves what the best way to govern and address issues is. And many authors, including in the book The Future Is Now, an introduction to prefigurative politics by Monticelli, really stress that prefigurative practices need to be anchored in the embodied experiences of the people and the places they're from. And I think this resonates a lot with sustainability transformations, the idea around seed initiatives, and the fact that the way that we scale up transformations is starting at that local scale, that community scale, where we are addressing small grassroots issues and building new relationships and innovations that can ultimately be scaled up to both mitigate and adapt to climate change. The framing of prefigurative politics is often within this idea of forming the structure of new society within the shell of the old. And so embodying those future realities that you want to come into being in the practices within our own organizations and our own lives. These can be things on an organizational level, like decision-making structures, and also things in our own lives, and really emphasizing that the personal is political, and the other way, the political is personal as well. This false separation of personal and political matters has led to this massive apathy in terms of the state of the world, in terms of how we address it, and really getting to that place of understanding the true interconnectedness of the personal and the political and the non-human is key. And this came up a lot in my discussion with Climate Hope Lab about the importance of showing people that they can do something, that although these issues feel insurmountable, that they are urgent and they do need addressing, there are things we can do. And a lot of authors, specifically coming from Lynn et al., stress that we need both prefigurative and strategic politics. Some critiques of prefigurative politics has framed it as naive, impossible to achieve, utopian. However, we can't form strategies and figure out the methods of change if we can't imagine what we want to change towards. And part of that shifting is really understanding diversity and plurality. This has come up a lot throughout this series of qualifying for climate justice and throughout my own learning as a scholar and activist, that there is no one right way of doing things, and there is no one way of understanding what has happened, what is happening, and what will happen. And because of this, any transformation has to be on multidimensional levels and multi-scales. And this is coming from literature in both prefigurative politics, like Monticelli's work, as well in a lot of sustainability transformations research, which speaks to, multi-level approaches and the ways in which issues need to be addressed and scaled to the local, regional, international levels. And a lot of different cultures envision the ways in which envision the relationships between the future, present, and past differently. In some work on the entangled time tree, looking at the way that African storytelling and folklore serves as a guidance for living in the present and oriented towards better futures, they acknowledge that there are multiple paths, alternative ways of conceptualizing futures, and that futuring can be embodied and empowered through stories. And Emergent scholar and activist Adrienne Maree Brown really emphasizes that transformation doesn't happen in a linear way, but through cycles, convergences, explosions, messiness, many paths being walked at once. And I think when we look at the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, we want there to be a clear answer as to how we save the animals, how we save ourselves. And we want to be able to measure that impact, measure how far we are. And we do measure what we're lacking, we measure what we've done, we measure what we still have to do. What most people don't understand is how we actually do those things. And I think what prefigurative politics, as well as seed initiatives, can teach us are all the different ways that the work you do within your communities, within your own lives, can contribute to prefiguring the future that we want, to developing a more sustainable, equitable, and just society, whether that be through community gardening, shopping at farmers markets, mutual aid within your own networks, encouraging the naturalization of your city parks. And as I spoke about this often black or white thinking about adapting to and mitigating climate change, a lot of the literature, frames that this kind of restricted future thinking and sustainability science, which looks at, the apocalyptic charts and graphs and measurements, restricts our imagination and really risks box in thinking. So, which means that people are unlikely to envision this radical transformation that is necessary. The way that we get there are through many different possibilities that depend on listening to each other, building relationships, love, and liberation from the constant oppression which we are all faced with. Andrea Ritchie, in Practicing New Worlds, really speaks to this way that we work to build new worlds outside of existing systems of power, but we also need to experiment, build, and practice new ways of being in relationship with each other and the planet. And that system changes begin with critical connections. Sometimes speaking about systems change, the fact that the root causes are the entire system which we live in, is that it feels everywhere and all at once, meaning anything and everything you do to tackle oppression and unsustainability is tackling the system, and it feels unreachable. It feels like the complete roots of our society that permeate everything. And when it's everywhere, how could you possibly do something to counter it? And in Andrea Ritchie's work, she stresses that systems change begins with critical connections. So connecting with someone of like mind, understanding each other, figuring out how we can work together is really how we are going to encourage systems change. And a lot of this thinking comes from the work of abolition. And from Andrea Ritchie's book, quote, "Abolition is a set of prefigurative practices that reflect these principles, which require us to imagine, experiment with, and grow new ways to prevent, interrupt, transform, and heal from harm." Specifically, abolition speaks to harm beyond policing, but additionally, I think this can be applied to the harm we face as a result of the extractive relationship we have with the natural world. And this comes up as well in the Engage book, looking at Afro-Indigenous futures, in which they reference a conversation with Angela Davis, a prominent feminist abolitionist scholar and activist, speaking about how, although colonial governance systems and international global collaboration systems like the United Nations won't save us, it is a part of something that needs to occur. So it speaks to this need to both develop alternatives outside of our existing system and act within this system, which I think speaks very well to the ways in which we address sustainability and the places in which leverage points exist. Because there is a lot of work to be done to create global reports on the state of biodiversity loss across the planet, to encourage national heads of state to come out in support of ending the use of fossil fuels, which has only recently been introduced at the United Nations Conference of Parties on Climate Change, which is just mind-boggling that here we are in 2026 and we've only just begun at the international level to talk about the root cause of fossil fuels as the reason we have climate change. So we need to address these existing systems, but we also need to be thinking about how we build a different one. But part of how we understand how to build that different one is understanding the problems that we have in our existing system and how we can change those. And I think a big piece of this too is understanding that humans are not just a blight on the earth. I want to go back to some of the conversation I had with Samantha from Climate Hope Lab about the fact that people often come into the environmental space with the idea that humans are awful, that we are just the worst thing to ever happen to the planet, that the planet would be better off without us. And I myself have had those thoughts as well. But I love this quote from the interview with Leah Penniman in What If We Get This Right? Visions of Climate Futures, and quote, "We can make things better. Humans don't need to be a blight on the earth." As well as, quote, "The earth is madly in love with you, and you need to participate in this romance." And I also want to speak to the description of hope that Munoz in Cruising Utopia Queer Futurities states in that, quote, "Hope is work. We are disappointed. What's more, we repeatedly disappoint each other. But the crossing out of this hoping is neither the cancellation or grounds for hope, nor a discharge of the responsibility to work to change the present reality. We must dream and enact new and better pleasures, other ways of being in the world, and ultimately new worlds," end quote. And I think this is so clear as to how we think about hope, and really takes me back to my conversation with Climate Hope Lab. Hope can seem as something, abstract, unreachable, and impossible to attain in this world of extraction, polarization, and apocalypse. However, it's what we use to keep going, and the ways in which we can think about the realities of the issues facing us, as well as that future we want to live in. And I think that's why prefiguration is so critical in sustainability transformations. If I didn't have thoughts about what I would like to see in a world where we're more connected to each other, to our more than human kin, and then what would all this work be for? Most of my life has been dedicated to environmental issues and climate change. Yet, we're in this place of rapidly destructive and disruptive forces of climate disaster that are causing massive devastation to communities across the globe. And so the ways that we build that resilience is by envisioning these alternative futures and by building these relationships, networks, and practices within our daily lives, within our communities, to both withstand the impacts of climate change and develop worlds in which we can address them more fully and have a more just, equitable society. And I think that is a perfect place to come to throughout these readings and my engagement with these topics in my qualifying exams, to really understand the importance and context of my work as I move forward in thinking about how queer ecologies and queer relationship building can help us in terms of understanding how transformations towards sustainability can be more fulsome and equitable. Thank you so much for listening.